The room was quiet, too quiet for two men whose names had echoed across decades of innovation and rivalry. It was somewhere off the grid, a neutral space neither had visited before. No logos, no press, just bare walls, soft leather chairs, and a low hum from the central air system. Steve Jobs sat on the left, legs crossed, a distant look in his eyes. He looked thinner than most remembered, the angular cheekbones casting soft shadows under the dim light. Across from him sat Bill Gates, posture firm, hands folded, expression unreadable. This meeting wasn't scheduled, it wasn't publicized. In fact, no one else knew it was happening. They hadn't spoken like this in years, not without intermediaries, public stages, or legal teams in the background. This was different. This was human. "I almost didn't come," Steve said. Bill nodded. "I figured that." A beat passed between them, thick with unsaid words. "I wasn't sure what there was left to say," Steve continued, voice softer now. "We've done everything, haven't we?" Bill leaned forward slightly. "Maybe, but I think the question is, did we understand any of it?" Jobs let the silence linger. He always had a flair for the dramatic pause, but this time it wasn't for effect. It was searching, probing the past. "You remember the first time we met?" he asked. "In Albuquerque," Gates replied. "You showed up in a denim jacket, thought you were the coolest guy in the room." Steve gave a crooked smile. "And you wore that ridiculous V-neck sweater like you were running IBM. I was just trying to get taken seriously," Gates said. "You didn't care if anyone did." Jobs's gaze dropped for a second, the smile fading. "Sometimes I wonder if that was courage or just arrogance." Bill didn't reply right away. Instead, he reached into his bag and pulled out a yellowed newspaper clipping. He laid it gently on the table between them. It was an old article from the 1980s, Jobs on the cover under the headline, "The Genius Who Will Change the World." Steve didn't touch it. "That was the first time I felt like I was losing," Bill said. "You?" Jobs raised an eyebrow. "You owned the software world. You were in every home." Bill shook his head. "But you were in every dream." The words hung there. For a moment, the war between Apple and Microsoft wasn't just about operating systems or design philosophy. It was about identity, about validation. "I was scared of you," Gates admitted, "because you could see things before they existed. You didn't build products. You built belief." Steve's jaw tensed. "And I envied you. You could scale anything. You could turn code into currency faster than anyone else on Earth." They sat with that, not as titans, but as men who had spent decades walking parallel paths, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind, but always aware of the other's footsteps. "I used to tell people," Jobs continued, "that Microsoft had no but the truth is, I was just angry that you were winning." "You were right," Gates said quietly. "We didn't care about beauty, we cared about dominance." Another pause. Jobs reached for a glass of water, his hand trembling slightly. He took a sip and set it down with care. "There's one thing I've never said out loud," he murmured. "When I was ousted from Apple, I blamed everyone. But most of all, I blamed myself. And even then, I watched you rise. And I hated how much I respected it." Gates looked at him, eyes softening. "I never celebrated your fall. I just didn't know how to stop climbing." The overhead light flickered, then steadied. Outside, the clouds had shifted. A shaft of sunlight briefly lit up the table between them, landing on that old newspaper clipping. Jobs reached out slowly, finally touching the page. He traced his younger self's photo. "Funny how we're remembered more for the war than for the work," he said. Bill nodded. "History loves a good fight, but it forgets the quiet nights, the lonely hours." Steve leaned back, exhaling. "What do you think it cost us? This obsession." "Everything," Gates replied. "And nothing." Their eyes met, and in that moment, everything unsaid was understood. The stillness in the room gave way to the gentle tick of a hidden wall clock. barely audible but persistent, the kind of sound that filled the gaps between everything unspoken. Steve broke the silence. You remember that summit in '97, the one where I came back to Apple? Gates gave a faint nod. You stood on stage, and you said something like, "We have to let go of the idea that for Apple to win, Microsoft has to lose." I meant it, Steve said, but God, it burned me to say it. You looked like it did, Bill replied, a small smirk escaping. Steve chuckled, but it faded into a sigh. That wasn't just about business. That was me swallowing pride for the company I built like a child, and watching you, standing beside me, I felt like the prodigal son returning. Only this time, the father was the guy who outscaled me. Bill leaned back, arms crossed, his tone softer now. We both played God in different ways. You painted the future like art. I assembled it like an equation. Exactly, Jobs said. I wanted things to feel alive. You wanted them to work. I still want them to work, Bill said. But your machines had soul. Mine just had circuits. There was no sarcasm, no bitterness, just clarity. Steve stood up slowly and paced a few steps. His gait was slower now, a subtle reminder of the time he didn't have as much of anymore. Do you ever wonder if we focused on the wrong things? He asked. Back turn. Every day, Gates said almost immediately. I think about the hours I gave to software when I could have been home. Think about the billions made, and the days I missed. Steve turned around. I wasn't any better. I saw myself in every screen, every iMac, every iPod, every damn pixel. But sometimes, I didn't see the people closest to me. They both went quiet again, and yet Steve added, I don't know if I'd do it differently, because then I wouldn't be me. Bill gave a solemn nod, and I wouldn't be me. The light shifted as the sun lowered. Shadows lengthened across the floor. The world outside kept moving. Cars passed. Emails were sent. Apps were downloaded. But here time had thickened. Steve sat back down. Do you remember the email I sent you in? The one where you said we should talk more? Bill asked. Steve nodded. Yeah, I was sick. I knew it was getting bad. But I realized something. I didn't hate you. I never really did. I knew that, Gates replied, voice catching for a second. And I felt the same. We were just orbiting different planets. Steve gave a sad smile. But the same sun. Gates smiled too. Exactly. There was a knock on the door, soft, tentative. They both ignored it. Instead, Gates pulled something else from his bag. A framed photo. It was old, slightly faded. A rare image of the two of them laughing together at a dinner party in the late '80s. Not posing, not performing, just laughing. I keep this in my office, Bill said. People think it's for nostalgia, but it's a reminder of that once, even in the middle of all the war, we shared something real. Steve took the photo, stared at it for a long moment. I don't even remember what was so funny. I think someone spilled wine on a prototype, Bill said. They laughed, genuine, hearty laugh, and for a moment, they weren't icons. They were two men in a room, holding time by the throat, and letting it go all at once. Jobs wiped his eye. God, I needed that. So did I. A long beat. You think they'll ever understand? Steve asked. Who? The world. What it cost? Bill thought for a moment. No, but maybe they don't have to. Maybe it's enough that we did. Steve stood once more and walked to the window. The sun had dipped lower, streaking the sky with gold and pink. It's getting late, he said. Bill stood too. Yeah, but neither of them moved to leave. Instead, Steve turned back, held out his hand, not the casual handshake of executives, but something slower, more deliberate. Bill took it, and in that grip was everything they never said: forgiveness, respect, farewell. The room was beginning to feel like a time capsule, suspended in an invisible current that neither man wanted to disrupt. Bill walked to the corner of the room where a tray of water glasses sat. He poured one for himself, then another, and handed it to Steve. You know what's funny, said, offering the glass. Steve accepted it with a curious look. What? I used to think you were reckless. Reckless with time, with people, with risk. But now, I realize you just moved faster, because you felt everything deep. Steve looked at the water in the glass, his reflection rippling slightly. And I thought you were too calculating, like you had a formula for life and just stuck to it. But maybe you just didn't want to hurt anyone. They sat down again, and for a long while they said nothing. The weight of years pressed softly around them like dust on old books. I remember the first time I saw you on that cover of Time magazine, Bill said. I was in my office. You were what, 23, 24, 24, Steve replied. You were barefoot, Gates laughed. You had your legs crossed, and I remember thinking, this guy is either gonna change the world, or disappear trying. Steve grinned. Both apparently. Bill's smile faded into something quieter. We never told each other this. I think we both needed each other to become who we were. Steve nodded slowly. We were mirrors, and rivals, and roadblocks, and inspiration. There was a pause, a meaningful one. I still remember the garage, Steve said. Which garage? Bill asked. Not mine, yours. The one in Albuquerque. You had cables running along the walls like veins. It was messy and brilliant and ugly and alive. Bill chuckled. It was chaos. It was genius. Steve corrected. They both leaned back, each man now visibly older, not from age but from the weight of that one evening's reflection. Bill finally asked, do you ever wish we worked together, like really together, not just occasional partnerships, but co-builders? Steve thought about. He let the question settle. Yes, he said eventually, but it wouldn't have lasted. We were built from different fires. True, but imagine, Steve continued. Imagine what we could have made, something that didn't just function, something that made people cry and smile. Think, we were close once, Bill said. I know. Bill stood and walked to the window now. The sky outside had turned a velvety blue, stars just starting to peek through the atmosphere. Sometimes I look at the new generation and wonder if they even know what it took, Bill said. They don't, Steve answered. And maybe they shouldn't. It was never about pain. It was about possibility. Bill turned. But pain was part of the cost. Yes, but the reward was magic. Steve paused. There's something I wrote before I stepped down. I never sent it to anyone. You still have it? Bill asked. Steve nodded. He reached into his coat pocket, unfolded a worn piece of paper and began to read softly. If I've learned one thing, he read, it's that innovation without compassion is just machinery, and compassion without innovation is just hope. But together they form the only equation that can change the world. Bill's throat tightened. Did you write that for me? I didn't know it at the time, Steve said, folding the paper. But yes, maybe I did. And in the silence that followed, nothing needed to be said. The room held it all. Rivalry, brotherhood, forgiveness, regret, admiration, and the subtle heartbreak of paths that almost aligned. When they finally left the room, the night had fully claimed the sky. No paparazzi, no lights, just two men, walking down separate hallways, each carrying less weight than they had when they entered, and for once they didn't look back. Legends don't always leave behind machines. Sometimes they leave behind memories, unfinished sentences, and late-night reflections. And somewhere in a quiet room far from Silicon Valley, two minds once divided by ambition finally found peace in the pause between worlds.